Hi everyone. Okay, let's get started. We have a lot to talk about today. This week we're talking about outer space, the solar system, planets, stars, the moon. So today we're talking about the moon and we're going to talk about the phases of the moon. And that means that sometimes you look up at the moon in the sky and either you can't see the moon or the moon is just a little sliver. Sometimes it looks like a crescent. Sometimes it's a big giant full moon. So the moon looks different all the time. And we're going to talk about that. Before we get started, let's get started. I have a little song that I want to teach you about a rocket ship, and it's to the tune of I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Okay, so we're going to make a rocket with our hands. I'm a little rocket pointing at the moon. Now I'm getting fueled up. We'll be ready soon. When it's time to board me, then I'll say, blast off, zoom, we're on our way. I'm a little rocket pointing at the moon. Now I'm getting fueled up. We'll be ready soon. When it's time to board me, then I'll say, blast off, zoom, we're on our way. Okay, I thought that was a fun one. All right, so let's talk about the moon. Now, yesterday we made our rockets to the moon. And a lot of times when they send a rocket to the moon, they send something called a rover. And a rover is a robot explorer. Sometimes it's dangerous for people to go. So they send a robot explorer called a rover to check and see what's out there. And usually it'll have a video camera on it so people can watch. So on the moon, there is no air, there is no light. The light from the sun will reflect off the moon, and that's how we see it. There's no wind, and check this one out. The moon, the first people that walked on the moon, it was a very, very, very long time ago. But since then, there have only been 12 people to walk on the moon. Isn't that interesting? In all these years. So, okay. I want to get started and check out the phases of the moon. So I made this cool little chart for you, okay, about the moon phases. I put the Earth in the middle because the moon, remember we talked about this, the moon revolves around the Earth. Remember we talked about with our apple and our pear, okay? So here's our Earth and here's our moon, and it revolves around the Earth. Much slower than that, but. So the moon phases, so we start with a big, we start with a new moon, and when it's a new moon, we don't see it yet, okay? Then it starts to get a little bit bigger, and we see a crescent. That's what we call a crescent. Now, the scientific name for that is a waning crescent, okay? We don't really have to worry about that, but I just thought I would tell you, a waning crescent. But we see this little sliver. Then we have a half moon, and the funny scientific name for that is a waning quarter, okay? And that is the moon appears to be getting bigger. Now, it's not growing, but we can see more of it. So it seems to be getting bigger. Then we have a waning gibbous. A gibbous, the word gibbous, which is a funny word, is when you can see more than half of the moon. It's called a gibbous. So it's getting bigger. It's almost a full moon, okay? Then we have our big, huge full moon. It's so beautiful to look at. And then the opposite happens. It starts to seem like it's getting smaller. We can see less of it. So this, we can see more than half, so it's a gibbous. This is a waxing gibbous, when it appears to be getting smaller. So we could see a little bit less, right? Then we have the half moon, a little bit less. And then we have a crescent again, okay? And then we have the new moon, where we can't see the moon at all. So these are the phases of the moon. I thought that was very interesting. And we can go outside tonight and see if we can see the moon and what phase we are up to. All right. And with that, a classic, Good Night Moon by Margaret Wise Brown. This is one of my kids' favorites, and you can see that it's been loved. So let's hear this story, Good Night Moon. In the great green room, there was a telephone and a red balloon and a picture of a cow jumping over the moon. And there were 3 little bears sitting on chairs and 2 little kittens and a pair of mittens. And a little toy house, and a tiny little mouse. And a comb, and a brush, and a bowl full of mush. And a quiet old lady who was whispering, "Hush." Good night, moon. See the moon? Good night, moon. Good night, cow jumping over the moon. Good night, light and red balloon. Good night, bears. Good night, chairs. Good night, kittens. And good night, mittens. Good night, clocks. Good night, socks. Good night, little house. And good night, tiny mouse. Good night, comb. Good night, brush. Good night, nobody. Good night, mush. And good night to the old lady whispering, "Hush." See the moon? Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night,